historic celebration of the arts and sciences here at OSU. So we're also having a year-long celebration to try to think about the ways in which the liberal arts and the sciences can complement one another to think about improving human lives and human society. And so when we were talking about putting this together, my colleague and I, Tony Vogt, thought, how can we sort of think about various ways in which we can bring Star Trek into the picture? And so we're going to have a variety of different events, and we have some posters around that you can see, but we want to invite you all to continue thinking about this after our lecture today. At 6 p.m. at the Link Building, we're going to be having a reception for the Trek Theater with a little bit of finger food. Also, though, it's a cosplay reception, and so you'll get to see me in my best DS9 uniform in a little while. I thought I would try to rep a little bit, but I had to teach beforehand. Come on in. All right. So 6 p.m. is our reception with cosplay. Some folks are already beginning. Please come to the Link 228, and then the performance of the Drumhead by Trek Theater will be done this evening at 7 p.m. So big celebration going on of Star Trek. Okay. Without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. I became aware of Trek Theater about 2 years ago when I saw their performance here in Corvallis. I was a big fan of Trek in the Park in Portland. I went several times to go see the performances by the Atomic Arts Theater in Portland, where they were doing the original series episodes at various locales and parks in Portland. And I went to the final performance with what they did in underneath the St. John's Bridge, and realized that Star Trek is a big phenomenon in Oregon. Right? There had to have been about 2,000 people out there for that performance. And so when I heard that Trek Theater was doing this out here, I immediately wanted to find out what was going on. After that performance, I contacted Dr. Allaback to do an interview with her that's on the Anarres Project website, and talking about her, and I realized that her vision of what science fiction is about and what the possibilities of science fiction are align very closely with our vision here in the Anarres Project, that science fiction, speculative fiction, is a way of being able to think about a future different from the one that we have today, but also how to struggle and how to try to work toward that kind of future. And so we did this great interview, and I've been following Trek Theater for a lot, seen some of the great performances they've done in that past year. And so when we put together this program, I thought it would be really good to hear from her and from Trek Theater about the vision of thinking about Star Trek and social justice. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you all Dr. Christina Allaback, who is the artistic director for Trek Theater, and she's also a professor throughout the Willamette Valley of theater arts. And so she's going to talk a little bit about today about social justice and Star Trek. And there are a variety also of performers from Trek Theater here that I recognize. I don't know all your names, but I recognize you. So to welcome to you all, and I believe we'll have a conversation a little bit about these themes after this presentation. So,
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the Anarres Project for having me and having us here today. It's an honor. Thank you so much, and thanks to OSU too. All right, so Joseph wanted me to talk a little bit about the beginnings of Trek Theater and why I started Trek Theater, and also about sort of the lessons we use from theater practitioners that are the theater practitioners that work a lot in like social justice theater, and I take a lot of their theory and use it in my work. But first I want to say that I actually didn't found Trek Theater. To a group of, I don't know, how many were there, Matt? Like 4?
Yeah, maybe 5 of us.
Yeah, 5 of you sort of were inspired by Trek in the Park, but they wanted to do Next Generation in the park, right? And I auditioned, and I got the part of Data, and that was a lot of fun. So, but there was also, you know, lots of discussion like, what should we be called, TNG in the park? And I suggested Trek Theater because it doesn't limit the project to just performing in the park, and it also doesn't limit the project to just Star Trek. And one of my goals in doing this, you know, and I sort of took over the theater. And one of my goals has been to not just do Star Trek, but to do other maybe original science fiction plays or original stagings of plays. I've had people give me adaptations of Firefly and Firefly in the Park, and someone gave me a, even though it's not sci-fi, someone gave me a script that was all in iambic pentameter. That was the first episode of Game of Thrones. As you know, possibly if we go into like the fantasy genre, I don't know. So they have since moved onto other projects. So I've kind of made Star Trek my own project, our own project. But even before, it came at like a perfect time. I sort of was just out of grad school. I wanted to start a theater company. I wanted to do something called Sci-Fi Shakespeare, where I wanted to do science fiction versions of Shakespeare, but no one was really jumping on board. So this came at a perfect time. I've always wanted to start, you know, a science fiction theater and a populist people's theater for everyone, right? And so Trek Theater came along at this right time where I could do this. I could make this my project, a people's theater and a science fiction theater together. You know, one that was accessible to the average American, and one that was free. You didn't have to pay for it. For me, that's really important. So I want to talk about the mission of Trek Theater. We want to develop an appreciation for science fiction through theater, and an appreciation of theater through science fiction, and explore the potential of both as instruments of social change by providing free, family-friendly performances of science fiction to the community. My thesis of this presentation, Trek Theater makes theater more accessible in order to teach the lessons of social justice by using theories and techniques of Brecht and Boal. And some of you may or may not know those names, but I'll talk more about them later. But the big question is, if we're going to use theater as a tool for social change, the first question is, how do we get people to the theater? You know, I've heard it for years. Colleagues in board meetings, in faculty meetings, even conferences, theater conferences. We're sitting around and talking, and people say, "Oh, theater is dying. Oh, we need to get a new audience to come to the theater. You know, what are we doing? What can we do to get more people to the theater?" I feel like a lot of theater is inaccessible to the average American, I think. So I sort of want to ask this question: how do we get people to the theater? I sort of have four bullet points that I want to talk about bringing people to the theater. The first one is show times. This may seem rather insignificant, but most standard show times are 7:30 or 8 p.m. in the evening. Maybe, you know, a typical run. Maybe a 2 p.m. matinee, right? But jobs are as diverse as the population. And someone in the service industry, a 2 p.m. matinee or an 8 p.m. evening show might not be accessible to them. So I always try to have a variety of times. When we do a winter show, lots of times we have a late night show. When we're doing work outside, we kind of have the issue of sunlight, so we can't be as flexible. And also, since we rent space, it kind of depends on, you know, their show, when their shows are on. But I try to make times more accessible to people. Economics. Theater is expensive. It is expensive to put on. We gotta build sets. We gotta build props. We got costumes. We have to rent a space, which is probably our biggest, our biggest budget money squeezers. Those spaces are so expensive. And the same thing with other theaters besides us. Like, it's just an expensive project, especially professional theaters when you have to pay the, actors and directors and designers. It's a huge project. Therefore, that makes theater actually very expensive to attend. I recently saw the Book of Mormon at the Holt Center in Eugene, and I paid like $80, and we were 4 rows from the very back wall. That's a lot of money for a seat like so far away. You know, it's just like little itty bitty, you know, Mormons hanging out down there. Around here, you know, tickets are much more accessible at $25. But I mean, even for some people, that's hard. Say for a couple with children that might want to go out and see theater, I mean, they have to get a babysitter, right? And that's going to cost more money, you know. So I really like the idea of just having a free theater. You know, lots of theaters try to introduce industry nights or 2-for-1, but I kind of prefer to charge nothing. That way, you know, people who can afford a donation can give a donation. Help out the people who can't give a donation. Next time, maybe those people can give a donation for, you know, it's a big circle. We're all helping each other out, so we all get to go out and see some theater, right? You know, and I also would rather have someone come see a show than not, you know? That's sort of how I work. This is kind of a big thing. Subject matter. So you can still have 2-for-1 tickets, you can still have free tickets, you can still have industry nights. But if the theater isn't relatable, if the subject matter isn't relatable to your audience, you know, they might not be interested in coming. And also, I mean, and I'm gonna, and because theater is really expensive, it relies on lots of, you know, upper middle class to get the donations, they buy the tickets, and lots of theaters get kind of stuck in this sort of, well, we have to please this demographic, so everything we do is for that demographic. And lots of theater artists I know and talk with admit to this. They're just like, we're stuck in this loop. We'd love to do something experimental or different, but it's not gonna pay the bills, right? If no one comes. So it's this kind of, you know, loop. So, you know, this is actually more in small cities, college towns, not so much in the major markets. In Chicago, New York, there's kind of sort of something for everyone in those big markets. So I'm really kind of talking about these smaller markets that I've worked in. Because I used to live in Chicago, and, you know, there was free theaters. There was very strange theater. There were theaters in basements. There were theaters in people's apartments. There was everything if you wanted to go see it, right? But I feel like a lot of theater is also realistic, right? And my attitude is sort of like, oh, if you want to see realism, go see a movie, you know? I remember, I'm going to tell a little story here. I mean, if anyone knows the play Dinner with Friends, there's a movie called Dinner with Friends. I never saw the movie, but I've seen the play a couple times. And in Illinois, I saw the play Dinner with Friends. And they're sort of like, you know, these kind of wealthy two couples. And in the beginning scene, they're making dinner for each other. And one couple had just come back from a 3-month vacation in Italy. And they're talking how wonderful it is. And they talk about this old woman on an olive orchard that they met. And they really talked about her in a really condescending way, and like almost this colonialist way. And it really bothered me. So when the drama started and they both went through divorces, I kind of was like, I don't really care. They kind of were condescending to that like old Italian woman. So, you know, I just couldn't relate. And also, I mean, I don't go on 3-month vacations to Italy and, you know, rent mopeds and drive through the lovely landscapes that are Italy, right? I really want a theater that everyone in the family can enjoy. It engages everyone. Children can come see it. I mean, sometimes Star Trek might get a little too deep for children, but people always bring children to our shows, and so parents, I think it's really good to open discussion, right, with children and parents. And children have always been very engaged to our shows, especially the summer shows. We do like puppets and things like that, and children really like sort of action adventure and spaceships and aliens. But also I've seen like parents, you know, if you're coming to see the Drumhead tonight, I had some friends who brought their very young children to the Drumhead, which is kind of a really heady play, but the children were very engaged, and the parents took time to talk with their children about what was going on and these issues. And I mean, I just think it's a great start for parents to start these conversations with their children. If we can make a theater that has subject matter more appealing to everyone, people will come to the theater. If we make a theater that families can come and attend, bring their children and start discussions that children can enjoy and parents can enjoy, people will come to the theater. This is why I chose science fiction as the subject matter of Trek theater. And I've got this lovely quote by Isaac Asimov that you have probably seen. I want to just talk in Isaac Asimov quotes, really. Science fiction is an existential metaphor that allows us to tell stories about the human condition. I have often wondered why there is such a strong mainstream backlash against science fiction, and found myself on more than one occasion defending its validity as literature. And I can relate to that because I find myself on more than one occasion defending my theater company as valid theater. But I feel especially Star Trek relates to everyone. I mean, we can't really relate to people living on a starship in space, but the themes are very universal. Making sacrifices for your friends, oppression, drugs and addiction, human rights. These are all things that we know about and that we're concerned with. We can relate to these stories. And a lot of the stories are stories that we know, but they're placed in a starship, right? That we're familiar with. And also, space is cool, right? Space is cool. I mean, I've loved science fiction ever since I was a child. Sorry to mention Star Wars, but my parents took me as a very, very young child to the drive-in movie theater to see the first Star Wars, and I've kind of been hooked on, even though that's kind of technically not science fiction, but I mean, there's robots and aliens, so I've kind of just been hooked on that since. And also, I feel it is accessible to a wider audience now that science fiction has sort of become, and I'm going to use a problematic word. If any of you are college students, I'm going to use a problematic word, mainstream. Science fiction has become mainstream. And I kind of feel that's a bit of the movie industry a little bit, but it's kind of sort of, I kind of feel like there's this term that neo-Marxists use, if anyone knows the situationists. They use this term called recuperation, where they take something that is revolutionary, that may be a threat to the status quo or the mainstream, and they recuperate it into the mainstream so it kind of loses its revolutionary spark, right? So I feel in a way, especially like Star Trek and the more revolutionary sort of science fiction stories, they have this revolutionary idea. I feel it's kind of been recuperating. However, I feel like, it's still sort of keeping its revolution. It doesn't lose its revolutionary spark, though, the way, say, the punks did in the 70s, right? So the punks were very anti-establishment, and so after a few years, you started seeing photographs of punks with their, lovely mothers and grandmothers knitting, and then we saw punk fashion down runways, and it became very not dangerous anymore. But I feel like science fiction still has that revolutionary spark. Unless we're going to talk about sort of the, I also use this word, and I'm sorry, the dumbing down of science fiction, like the new Star Trek movies. They don't have that like Star Trek revolutionary spark. I mean, they're fine as an action adventure movie, but I just feel they're missing that revolutionary spark. But I'm I don't know, I'm split. I'm either stoked that science fiction is popular, but I'm also a little bitter because I got made fun a lot as a kid. Right? I also want to talk about recontextualization, because theater kind of also needs to change a little bit. We consume media very differently than we did. We have the internet, film and movies, and I love the internet. I think the internet is an absolutely fascinating cultural artifact, and it's very entertaining. So, kind of in a way, we're sort of recontextualizing Star Trek, right? So, it's a postmodern idea, right? It says there it's a process that extracts text from its original context in order to introduce it into another context, giving it a new meaning. And so, excuse me, and postmodernism, for those of you who don't know postmodernism, there's the big thing that postmodernists say is nothing is new, everything is borrowed, and they use the frame death of the author, right? The death of the author. And but I feel like recontextualization is a huge part of how we consume media now and how we're entertained. So, in order for theater to survive, that's my next one. Oh, okay. In order for theater, yeah, let me show this to you. Recontextualization on the internet, I think is absolutely fascinating. Hopefully these work. But there's this larger conversation going on. All these different texts, intertextuality, all these different texts sort of having conversations with each other. And this is sort of one of my favorite sort of examples. I say recent, but in internet time, and in internet timeline, this is old news, right? So old news. But Chris is a little kind of behind on the internet. But so what I think is really fascinating, let's see if this works. Oh, it's gonna take me out of it and everything's gonna be, oh no, okay. Oh, bummer. I knew this was gonna happen. What a bummer. I'll just go back to where we were. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So anyways, there's a seal gif. Maybe some of you have seen it, maybe some of you not, of the seal playing a toy saxophone, right? And he's swimming around the water. And some guy or girl on the internet saw that and was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny to make a GIF? And it looks like the seal is just spinning around indefinitely, right? I don't even know if I want to like try this. Everything's gonna go. Oh no. Is it gonna work? Maybe it'll be a Maybelline. Hopefully there won't be a Maybelline commercial. I apologize if there's a Maybelline commercial. Oh, here it is. Right? So someone has taken, right? This made me laugh so hard because someone has taken that GIF of the seal playing the saxophone, and someone else who plays saxophone, who loves Game of Thrones, decided to. Someone who loves Game of Thrones and plays saxophone decides to record this version of the Game of Thrones the Game of Thrones theme song, and then put them together and make a new thing out of it, right? Two texts are in conversation with each other, and then it becomes, I know, let's cancel that before Keyboard Cat comes on. And this one was, when I was doing this lecture, I fell deep into the vortex of YouTube. And this is another great one. Is it going to do it? Anyway, I don't know, maybe not. But, it becomes it's no longer just this GIF of the seal. It becomes this larger conversation with Game of Thrones people, right? It's a recontextualization of like the Game of Thrones theme, the recontextualization of this bizarre seal playing a toy saxophone. It's very bizarre, but that's kind of my favorite example of recontextualization right now. But anyway, so what do I want to say? Oh, let's go back. All right, so theater has basically been the same for 2,500 years, and my goal has been taking theater performance and tweaking it just a bit to make it more appealing to people who get their entertainment from the internet, film, and movies, right? So we take what we're doing is we're taking episodes of Star Trek and we're recontextualizing those episodes, not just to make theater more appealing, but to make our work part of a larger conversation with other Star Trek fans. We're putting them on stage, which is recontextualizing them, and we're doing our own interpretation of it. And through doing it at a different time, we're changing the meaning a little bit of the play. So I decided to do the Drumhead for our winter show it was kind of a spring show, kind of. Our indoor show, we'll call it. I decided to do Drumhead because it really spoke to me about current events, specifically the Syrian refugee crisis, and the way that Syrians and also Muslims have been targeted as, possible terrorists, right? So since the show is sort of about this security versus personal liberty, I feel that it was pretty relevant to today's, even though it was written back in '91, I felt it was pretty relevant to today's current events. So the struggle between personal liberty and surveillance or security has been with us forever, and even more so after 9/11, I feel. And while the Star Trek writers, it was written by Jerry Taylor. Interesting note: it was originally supposed to be a clip show, and the writers were like, "No way! We'll just write something that's kind of cheaper to put on." And Jerry Taylor wrote it and was inspired by the Red Scare, Joseph McCarthy's witch hunts. So that's sort of how it was originally. Its original context was, this Red Scare, these witch hunts, could happen in the future. How would a future humanity deal with it, right? It could just, we might never change, we might never grow, it still might happen. But by recontextualizing this episode, putting it on stage, it's now a play about something different that speaks differently to an audience that's sitting in the theater. And I feel like this play sort of is now about targeting Muslims, targeting Muslims and Syrian refugees in the context we're putting it in tonight, as you'll see, right? And I feel this, this is a quote from the Drumhead that I feel is so relevant today. Picard says, "Have we become so fearful? Have we become so cowardly that we must extinguish a man because he carries the blood of a current enemy?" And it's a very, very powerful moment in Drumhead. I apologize if that's a spoiler, but I'm going to assume everyone's probably seen the episode. So we're making theater relevant under the guise of the popular, and now we're in a bigger conversation with Star Trek fans, and we're bringing new meaning of it, and we're bringing new people to the theater and encouraging dialogue. All right, so part 2. Now we've gotten people to the theater. You said, come see science fiction, come see Star Trek, this is awesome. How are we going to use the tools of theater? How are we going to use the lessons of theater practitioners past to sort of teach us the lessons of social justice and social change? I've been greatly influenced. My 2 favorite practitioners and theorists are Bertolt Brecht and Auguste Dubois. And we'll talk about Brecht first because he's my favorite. He has influenced my work so much. He rejected what he called culinary theater, which is we're going to sit in a dark room and we're just going to eat it up, and we're not going to question it. We're just going to be like, oh, what a delightful little play this is. So he wanted to, by the way, he's German. I don't think I said that, but he was born in Bavaria. He wanted to deny audience a catharsis. Now, those of you who don't know catharsis, it's the purging of pity and fear. Aristotle talks about it quite a bit. And it's sort of that moment where, oh, phew, everything's fine, right? It's this, oh, good, everything's fine, we don't have to worry about it. He hated the catharsis because when you watch a play and you're like, oh, phew, everything's fine. You're complacent. You're suddenly like complacent about it. He says, we're going to deny the catharsis so people will be theoretically moved to revolt. His art was very influenced by Marxism, and he was very misunderstood, very misunderstood. Some people believe that his theater, when done correctly, is very dry and boring and didactic. But he really, it's really meant to be a people's theater, a very lively pop culture sort of theater with music and dance. He steals ideas from folklore and mythology, beer hall entertainment. So, I mean, he's kind of misunderstood. Some people hate him, some people love him. But I feel like his theater is really a vibrant theater. So he wants to deny, this says resolution, but it should say catharsis, right? He wanted to deny the catharsis. What do I want to say that I haven't said before? So this is sort of your traditional Aristotelian structure. And this is sort of the structure of most entertainment we see, most movies, most plays. There's an exposition, there's an inciting incident that starts the drama rolling, there's these rising actions, there's a climax, and then there's the denouement, the falling tension, and then the catharsis, and then the denouement, or wait, falling action, epilogue, they call it epilogue denouement, and the resolution is the catharsis, right? Brecht was more for an episodic structure. This is kind of a sort of, it's hard to draw a diagram of episodic structure, but this is sort of what it is. Each scene is a little episode in itself. You could watch one scene and it could be a play in itself, right? But there still is this kind of overarching spine of the play that tells a story. So it denies the catharsis. He wants you to know what is going to happen before you watch the play, so you can critically analyze how it's happening, right? So oftentimes I have a little picture here. Yeah, oftentimes you can see here, oftentimes he'll write on a screen, or, you know, these people are writing a screen, but he might have paper placards, and he was doing it, that would say, you know, she loses her baby in this scene, right? And then, oh, we know how it ends, so now we have to watch how it unfolds and critically analyze it. So his big theory is the Verfremdungseffekt, which means to make the familiar strange. To make the familiar strange, and I think this is pretty much all science fiction. All science fiction is making the familiar strange. We have stories and themes that we can relate to, but then we set it in a new place, in a strange new place. We're familiar with sacrificing things for our friends. We're familiar with attending a friend's wedding, but suddenly when you find yourself on a foreign planet and you have to fight your friend to the death with a lirpa, suddenly it's strange. And he also wanted to discourage empathy, which is where the playwright gets the best of the theorist, because his plays do bring about empathy, right? So it's in theory, right? We feel sorry, we feel empathy for his characters, even though he tells us we're not supposed to. But when he theorizes that if we discourage empathy, then we, then we critically analyze that character, and we see their place in history, we see their place in capitalism, right? He also interrupts. He'll have like a very serious scene and suddenly interrupted with dance and song, so that we stop and think, wait, what was that scene about? I'm going to critically analyze that scene. So he was very, very into exposing the tools of the theater, right? Exposing the tools of the theater so that we're not swept away by it. We always know that we're in a theater. He would have the lights showing. He would have sometimes the actors sitting on stage. Sometimes he would have musicians on stage. Scene changes were done in front of the audience, and that's actually something that has taken off. Like every play I see, like the stage is changed right in front of the audience. I don't see many scene changes done with blackout anymore, or behind a curtain. So he advocates the separating of theater elements so the means of production are revealed, allowing the audience to act, to think, and act rather than being swept away. And I've used a lot of this in Trek theater. So we did a show, we did Measure of a Man 2 years ago, and what I did is I put all the actors on stage in costume and had them, when you're not on stage, you have to be a fan and you have to look like you're enjoying the show, which hopefully they were. But so in a way I wanted to say, we're not different from you. You know, most of us weren't actors before Trek Theater came along. So it's a way of saying, we're fans like you, we're a community. It's not a division, there's not a division. We're actors, your audience. We're all together, right? And also we use the tools of theater, and I think this is something that delights our audiences a lot, is how we use the tools of theater to show science fiction-y things, right? So if there's a buzzer, we're gonna have a sound and someone's gonna just mime, you know, hitting the communicator on the wall, right? Or, you know, everyone loves it when the ship gets hit and everyone's like, whoa, right? You know, we're not gonna have a screen that has, you know, space outside. We're gonna use a puppet. We're gonna use people standing behind the screen communicating with the people on the bridge. And I really enjoy that. So it's sort of like, you know, our own special effects are in a way making the familiar strange, right? We know Star Trek and we know how it works, and then suddenly it's new and strange to us again. Let's see, what else we want to talk about? Historification. So this is part of the Verfremdungseffect, or the V effect, if you don't want to say that very long German word. History was very, very important to Brecht, and he wanted to show us how history affected us, how history made us the way we are, how history places us in sort of a classist system. So the technique of historification is placing a story in a past historical period in order to make a comment about a current issue. And sort of it's to keep you from, you know, say you know, for example, he did a play called Mother Courage and Her Children. Mother Courage was a war profiteer. But this was happening, the play was about it's in the 17th century, I can't remember, 30 Years' War in the 17th century, but he's trying to make a commentary about World War II, right? So at the time, when you do, say, a play about World War II, people are going to be like, I'm against World War II, or I'm for World War II. And then there's like a disconnect. They don't want to think about it, right? You know, I always use pro-life and pro-choice. If I did a play about pro-life or pro-choice, the pro-choice people would be like, I'm pro-choice. The other people would be, I'm pro-life. And then again, there's no discussion, right? And so by placing it in a historical past, then there's a division that helps you think about what's going on, think about the commentary rather than making that like strict judgment, right? And it also shows us how history repeats itself and how we need to correct it. And I use a term, I kind of said this term one day and I laughed and I said, no, what a silly term. But I'm like, this is what we're doing. This is what it is. It's science fictionication. Called science fictionication is what we're doing. Instead of putting a play, a show in a historical period, we're going to put it in an imagined past, right? And then make a comment about current events today. Example, Measure of a Man. We did Measure of a Man, which was written early 90s again. But it's about whether or not data is legally a person. And at the time was the marriage equality for LGBTQ community, and I felt this is perfect. We're going to set this, and we're going to sort of hopefully create discussion about marriage equality. Also, I got an image of the outcast up here, if any of you are familiar with that. This is actually a really good episode because it does actually deny catharsis, those of you who know. At the end, it gives us a very dyspeptic if you remember that. There's no catharsis. We're denied a catharsis. But that's about, again, that's about gay rights. It was written in the 90s. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield was about racism in America. You know, the half-black, half-white aliens come on the Enterprise, and you know, we think about racism in America. I have Planet of the Apes because when I was like 12, it blew my mind. I was like, I'm like, it's all about religion. Wow! Science fictionication. We're going to show this very bizarre world where, you know, apes have evolved to be more like humans, and humans have evolved to be, you know, more like animals. Humans are animals, but you know what I mean. To make a commentary about religion. And also, like, I really also like the movie Moon. Has anyone seen the movie Moon?
Yeah.
It's also about, you know, are clones sentient beings? Well, should they have the same rights as people? And that could very possibly be a debate that we have in the future. Another thing I like to use is gestus, which is a fancy German word for gesture. It's a gesture done to make the familiar strange. For example, Brecht liked to use the bow, right? A servant bowing to his master, right? But he wouldn't have the servant just bow. He'd do something very strange, like have the servant bow like over and over, or maybe do like a small bow and then a large bow, and then it makes you think, that's weird. Oh, yes, bowing is a natural, it's a classist thing. Very, very famous one is from Mother Courage. Her son is killed. She doesn't want to be found out, otherwise she'll be killed. So she has a silent scream, right? And it's, you know, she's like, right? She's holding this pose, this gesture where she should be screaming, but nothing's coming out. I'd like to use this example, our very recent example of gestus in our musical from the summer. So when dealing with the original series, there's sexism we have to deal with, right? The sexism of the 60s. And I kind of was like, well, you know, Nurse Chapel is always, you know, she's very domestic. In the beginning, she tries to serve Spock the plomeek soup, and then later on, he asks for the plomeek soup, and she's very delighted to make the plomeek soup. So we kind of made a joke about it. She always was holding the tray with plomeek soup on it in every scene she was in. Right? To sort of make the familiar strange. Like, it's kind of familiar to us that women are live in a domestic world. Women should be domestic, right? But if we make a joke out of it, it's like, no, actually, no, that's really just a thing. That's just, it's not natural. It's not natural. So, yeah, that was a really good example of gestus that we had used. Now, Augusto Boal said that Brecht did not go far enough. He wrote Poetics of the Oppressed, and again he said he doesn't like Aristotelian structure for the same reason, but he says Brecht does not go far enough. So he has something called simultaneous dramaturgy, and he doesn't have spectators, he has spect-actors. And he says this is the solution. This is a rehearsal for the revolution. Because he was working with, you know, Brazilians where there's a lot of oppression there. And he also said this doesn't work with Americans. He said that, like, his theater doesn't work with Americans. So in his book, he just goes through the major movements in theater and says, look, theater belongs to the ruling class. We can no longer let it belong to the ruling class. We have to take it back. So actors and audience work together. He has three sort of major theater forms: the image theater, spectators, actors sort of hold an image of oppression, right? And the spect actors can come in and sort of move the actors who are frozen into a more ideal situation. There's also form theater, which is the actors, the troupe presents a scene of oppression, and the spect actors, the audience, is allowed to come in, redo that scene in a different way to fight against their oppression. And then invisible theater, which is his most controversial theater, if any of you know Boal, it's oftentimes been called theatrical rape. He goes into a public area and actors, his troupe goes into a public area and they kind of do something that disrupts something, and usually people get arrested at the end. So a very famous one is that they go into a grocery store, a guy, a gentleman from the troupe takes some groceries up to the cashier and says, "I'm sorry, I'm unemployed, I can't pay for this. Can I please work in your grocery store for a couple hours to pay for my food?" And then there's another plant in line who might say, "Oh yes, you should let him do that. That's a great idea." And then there's another plant who says, "No, you shouldn't do that." And then people start talking, people start fighting. I think people did get arrested when they did this. There's also one at a fancy restaurant. A guy goes to a fancy restaurant, gets a really expensive meal, and offers to wash dishes to pay for the meal. The same sort of thing happened, right? People get, arrested. So we're not really doing Boal as he described it, where spect actors perform and rehearse for the revolution. But his work has influenced me a lot. So, in a way, we're kind of reclaiming theater from a ruling class. But people of all socioeconomic levels come to our show, all ages, all education levels. Also, our troupe, too. And we also do lots of sort of inside Star Trek jokes, too, right? We're fans, so we're going to kind of do a nod, wink, wink to our audience, right? Those, Star Trek moments we might emphasize for humor's sake. It's always very funny what the audience chooses to laugh. There might be something very serious, and then everyone starts laughing, right? So we put in some inside jokes, again, showing that we're fans, we know the stuff, we love the stuff, you guys are fans too, we're all in this together, right? So I like to call my actors fan actors. They're different from an actor, but they're more similar to the spectators, right? They're a fan, they're fan actors. Inspired by Boal's spect actor, but not quite the same thing. Just saying that we're all equal. And so I've been doing lots of brainstorming how to get an audience more involved, make it more Boalian, I guess. Having spect actors, having the audience involved with things. I kind of don't care if people text or take photos or videos of our shows, because that's sort of how we consume media now. My husband and I will watch a movie and we'll have a question and we'll pick up our phone and be like, "Oh yeah, right, this was written by so-and-so," right? Or we'll have questions and we'll get them answered while we're watching the show. So, in a way I want to get the audience involved perhaps with technology, so that they become more like spect actors. Maybe somehow using that technology to communicate with actors, to become part of the show themselves, helping a character on stage, playing music, things like that. And I've also been thinking about doing Trek on the Beach. Doing the Gorn episode, on a rocky part on the coast. But then it gives us the problem of, if there's a bunch of waves and wind and rain, we're not going to be able to hear anyone. And, we thought that, wouldn't it be cool if we had, them mic'd, but have, the dialogue streaming somewhere where you can, plug in your phone and you can hear it. And maybe, have some sort of other way that they can be involved using technology with this show. So we may not be preparing our audience for the revolution. We might not be rehearsing for the revolution the way Boal wants us to be. But I feel in the spirit of Boal, we're rehearsing for the future. Having physical actors on stage, physical people on stage, performing an almost utopic future in front of us, I feel makes that future more real to us than, say, watching it on film. I feel that by showing an audience a hopeful future, they will work towards that. They will work to help create that utopic future, a future that wins the fight for social justice, a future of equality, and a future for everyone. And I'd like to end with another Isaac. Oh, I forgot this one. There's some lovely pictures. All right. And I'd like to end my talk with another Isaac Asimov quote, because I think it really sums up this sort of feeling. Individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinded critics and philosophers of today, but the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all.